Hello. Well, I'm going to cover some of the same ground that people have covered before, but also hopefully talk about some ways in which some of the questions that or points that have been raised might possibly be answered. So I just want to talk about how myself and a couple of other colleagues have used lecture capture to try and sort of fill in things with lectures either before, during or after the lecture process. So I think we're all agreed, well, we may all be agreed that there's quite a lot wrong with lecturers, as the lecturers, maybe. As the gentleman from the law school said, to a certain extent there's a bit of a question of quality, you know, what happens if you do get something wrong, that sort of thing. And different people are good lecturers and different people are bad lecturers, and different students like certain other lecturers, and so not everyone fits everyone's sort of expectations. There's this sort of problem where, you know, you've got students who might not be engaging as well as we would hope they would be. There was a student drinking beer in a lecture I was giving yesterday, which was quite fun. And the main problem for me is the bit they might miss bits or misunderstand things. No matter how good they are at note taking, they will inevitably miss stuff. I looked back at my undergraduate notes the other day, and I was horrified by some fantastic artwork and not an awful lot of information. And also they are quite a didactic thing by nature, in that they don't have an awful lot of interaction with them. There are some good things about lectures in terms of it's a good, efficient way of delivering information. You can get consistent information out there, so you're delivering the same thing to a lot of people. It does allow you to sort of go into things in a bit more depth than you would necessarily having using a textbook or something like that. And for me, the important thing is that it allows you to tell stories, and it allows you to sort of encourage the students into an appreciation of the subject rather than necessarily just delivering information. And to a certain extent, taking notes in a didactic environment is similar to the sorts of things they might find in a professional environment. But there's ways in which maybe we can use technology to sort of help that sort of process along. So I've experimented with recording lectures or bits or support for lectures either before, during or after the actual lecture experience. I'm going to go backwards with that. I'll talk about after first, and then come to before, because I think before is the most important thing, as this gentleman over here said. So, sorry, I'm talking about during first, apparently. So, recording it during the lecture, as we've seen, can be quite useful. You can either record yourself or video things going on, or just record the screen with a microphone. And it's useful for students so they can go back, they can revise material, and that sort of thing. We've done that for a couple of our... Where are we? There we go. Yeah, okay. Okay, I did have one to show you. Oh, there we go. There we go. I think Bob Jones at the back helped us in BioSci and record some of these. This is some just recordings of lectures we did as part of one of our courses last semester, and they went up on a Facebook site we had for the course, so it was enclosed within that site for the students.
Now let's see what it makes, and it makes bundles and filaments. Now there's a number of bundles. You can have very rigid permanent bundles like microvilli.
So that's a colleague of mine, Kelly Berraby, talking. I'm not going to waste time explaining that too much. It's very, very obvious the sorts of thing that's going on there. But it does help students sort of revise material and that sort of thing afterwards. Again, as Alan says, we didn't find any drop-off of students from the course when we did that, even though they knew that they could get access to lecture material afterwards. So we didn't experience that to the same extent that they did in the law school. Although, again, I agree, I don't really have a problem with that. If 10 students turn up to the lecture, that makes it a more rich lecture for them as far as I'm concerned. Afterwards, we've used it to sort of help give extra guidance and general feedback on things, and especially feedback on work or advice about approaching exams and that sort of thing. So this is one thing I did for some students for a module my boss runs called Biology and Society, which does all sorts of hugging philosophy sort of things. And it was just trying to encourage them how to,
so the first thing to do is to
answer these sorts of
think
questions.
About the actual question. So let's take that question and look at it in a bit more detail. So what have you got to do? So first thing to note is you're being given a quote.
Okay, you can get the idea of that. That's using a series of tablets that we have in the pool rooms in biosciences, and I think they're available in most pool rooms. Are they? Do you know, Barbara?
The tablets.
Yeah. Or is it just? No, it's just in our ones. Okay. Sympodia. Yeah, they are. Okay. So it's a symposium that has a little stylus on it, and you can draw on the screen, and it draws it up on the actual PowerPoint itself, and then you can save that afterwards, so it has all of your annotations and things on it. So it's like a screen capture process, but a little bit more interactive. So that's one way in which we decided to use it. Another one was for giving feedback on coursework. So this is just how I used it for giving feedback on coursework. So this is an exercise I set some students, and this is just explaining to them the sort of approach they should have taken to address that.
Well, the way to find out that bit of information is if you have a look at the tutorial again. This little section here talks about different types of genetic mutants. These were usually found in yeast, and there's different types of secretory mutants or sec mutants. Type B sec mutant stops transport from the endoplasmic reticulum.
Okay, so that was just guiding them towards the sorts of areas they should have gone to find the information. I was able to use it then to explain the approach they should have taken in answering the question, rather than just giving them a tick or a cross as to whether they got it right or not. And one thing we're also, that was using Camtasia, by the way, which is the approach I've adopted. Another thing we've thought of, we haven't actually done it yet, is to do follow-up information for lectures. Now, I know a number of colleagues have little sort of drop boxes where students can pop little questions in, things they didn't understand, or things they were a bit confused about, or extra questions they might have thought of during the lecture. And what we want to do for next year is to run a little sort of kind of like a radio chat show type of a thing where after every lecture, where we sort of go through some of those between the two people who are teaching on the course, one person asking the questions, the other one talking about the answers. And so we're going to try that next year. We were hoping to do it this year, but never got around to it. And hopefully that will enrich the students' experience even more. So those are ways in which we've tried to use video capture to either support what we're doing during the lecture or to follow up on certain things afterwards. But for me, the best way of using these is to put information out there before the lecture actually happens. So it's worth thinking about what we think a lecture is for, or what we want a lecture to be for. So to a certain extent, it's about information transfer, or could be about information transfer. But also, I think most of us would like it to be about discussion, understanding the subject, maybe giving them a taster for a particular subject, inspiring them to then go away and look at things themselves. So to my mind, the actual format of having 300 students sat there listening to what you're saying and noting down information is a bit dull, really, and a bit lacking in what is not the best use of that time. This is, I can't remember where I got this from, just a random thing off the internet, but it's exactly the thing that Biggs talks about the amount of sort of concentration you essentially have during the lecture, and it's good for about 10 minutes or so, and then sort of fails after that. The point he's making is that if you have a student activity of some sort, just getting up, doing something, asking questions, talking in groups, that sort of rejuvenates that amount of concentration, the amount of interest. But at the end of the day, you've still got students in a room listening to a whole load of information. And there's the old adage that the purpose of a lecture is getting the information from my notes to their notes without going through the head of either person. So there's better ways of delivering the activity. And so that's why we opted to do some pre-recorded lectures for this particular course we were doing. And this was based on some, just check, sorry, I'll come back to that, where we essentially record the main information part of the lecture beforehand. We uploaded that to Blackboard, Learning Central. I did have to break it into 3 bits because the file itself was too large, so I just loaded up 3 independent files so students could download them easily. And then use the lecture session itself to go over that material again, to reinforce it, to ask questions, to get discussion, to bringing extra ideas and extra points, and to enrich that information as much as we possibly could. You could bring in things that, talking about research, where they proved certain aspects of the basic information that we gave them in the lecture. This was a second year course, so it was still quite content driven. The idea behind that was prompted by something Brenda Smith from the Higher Education Academy said a couple of years ago, which is that the main subject of a lot of lectures doesn't change that much year to year. Unless you're teaching sort of final year modules that are right at the cutting edge of a subject, an awful lot of it doesn't change. And so it made sense to record a lot of that rather than just presenting the same thing over and over again every year. There's also an important point that not all students are able to focus for that amount of time. I have an attention span of about 10 minutes, if that, and I'd be astonished if the students we have in our audiences have much more of an attention span. So they will miss information, they will have gaps, and their understanding of what you're saying will vary depending on the sorts of things they're making. And also, revision of material and embedding material is dependent on having those good notes. And I personally would prefer them to spend the time getting the information, embedding it properly, and then challenging that information and discussing it, which is a more sort of higher order level of thinking. So we use Camtasia, so that's just a little screencast of what Camtasia can do. You can do a number of different things on it. You can either just record the screen, or you can record the whole screen or part of it. You can record the screen with or without a picture of you. I did it without a picture of me. And then you can import bits and pieces, so you can import videos and that sort of thing into it. What you do is you record things, and then they set them. You have a series of different little files, and the benefit I had of this was that every now and then, as I was sat there delivering this to my computer, was every now and then I'd sort of fumble or lose what I was talking about, or just pause for a little bit too long, or end up accidentally saying something I shouldn't, or the F word or something like that, which is the common thing that actors do. If you don't want to take to be used in a performance or on TV, you just say the F word and they get rid of it immediately. So I ended up re-recording little bits. But the beauty of Camtasia is you can then use these, you can edit them down, you can cut out any long pauses or things where you're scratching your head or you did something wrong. And so you can edit that down, stick them all together, and you produce a final file that has all of these bits in it that you can hopefully see there at the bottom, little chunks from each of these individual little videos, and then it produces it all as one single file at the end. So here's just a little example of the sorts of thing I did with that. We've seen several of them before. No, that's the wrong one. Yes, that's the right one.
But you need to at least appreciate what they are and what they do. Rabbits are very small proteins. They're GTPases, so they bind GTP.
Now you can have it zooming in on areas you want to. I prefer just to have the open screen itself and to point using the mouse.
They're very well conserved between all different eukaryotic kingdoms. And they have various different motifs. You don't really need to know exactly what those motifs do, but just know that they're very highly conserved between animals, plants.
Okay, so one of the disturbing things about doing this sort of thing is realising how many times you say or you pause too much or stutter or that sort of thing, which is quite disturbing. But it does give a sort of personalised way of delivering the information rather than just putting it down on a piece of paper or putting it in a book and letting students just read it. When I first did this, I surveyed the students to see what they thought about it, and it's not a massively scientific survey because I only did it once, but it does show some interesting results, and you need to bear in mind that this was a pilot project I did, and so it was something that's very new for the students. So if they had this throughout their time at university, I imagine they would have been slightly less enthusiastic about it, but even so it was quite encouraging. So in terms of whether it helped their understanding, most of them seemed to find that it made it more easy to understand the information that they had. And more importantly, most of them felt that it would be useful, or to them, felt it would be useful for their understanding when they came to use it for revision. In terms of the number of them that they watched, in that particular part of the course, I did 4 lectures, and most of them watched sort of 2 or 3 of them, which wasn't ideal, but it was something I kind of sprang on them. I imagine the more you go through a course using this, the more, hopefully, the more that would increase towards that side of the graph. More importantly for me is most of them, certainly as many as I would normally expect to come, came to all of the lectures. And I think that's because I made it very clear that the lectures themselves would discuss the material that I'd given them online and go into it in more detail, give them extra depth to it, and that sort of thing. I made the point that it wasn't extra stuff, but it was looking at the same stuff in more detail. So, as Alan said, it's giving them a reason to turn up. It's not just repeating the same thing. Joe?
Can I just ask a question on that point? Because you did that and they're applying before, did you find that you got more discussion then in the face-to-face session than you would have previously? Did that stimulate?
Previously, I had no discussion, and I got a reasonable amount. So yes, massively. I've not managed to find a way of getting discussion to work in lectures. I don't know if it's something I'm doing or something the students are doing, but by changing it this way, yes, it just completely changed it night and day. Yeah. They found it generally useful to have the extra lecture as well, so it wasn't just that they were getting the information online. They did actually find the live stuff useful as well. And generally, if they had a preference, they preferred the recorded approach rather than the traditional approach. So they did seem to like it. Most of them wanted to see me continue. There was only a few that thought it was a bad idea. And these are the sorts of things that they said were useful about them, and the sorts of things we've come across already. So you can pause and catch up. It sort of reinforces the information well. It's useful to be there for revision. I made the point that I classed stuff I talked about during the lecture at the actual live lecture as sort of extra material that they could draw on in their exam essays and things. In terms, they were able to rewind and go back over stuff, which they thought was a good thing. And they were able to do it wherever they wanted. They could do it, in their room, on the bus, on the loo, in the bath, wherever they wanted to. They could sit there and watch my lecture. Drawbacks of it, obviously, it's less of an interactive process than you have in a lecture, but the actual live lecture itself, I think, sort of backs that up. So the actual video itself, listening to me droning on about something for 45 minutes isn't massively exciting, but they are able to sort of stop and start things if they want to. There was a little bit of confusion over what they felt was core material and what they felt could be then classed as additional material, and one student gave that little quote, and I'm pretty sure I know who that student was, and she was a moaning old cow, young cow. So she said, "You're effectively doubling our workload," which isn't true. I was expecting them to do that extra work anyway. She obviously didn't, whoever the student was, I'm assuming it was this one, because she moaned about everything. But that is kind of missing the point to it. And there was an extra time cost. I can't get away from that. For me as a lecturer, which is something that the one commodity we don't have an awful lot of, but that extra time cost is largely loaded towards the front, and then it requires you updating things a little bit now and then, clipping things out, inserting things in if they've changed, and that sort of thing. Come on, technology, work for me. Okay, nothing's working for me. There we go. the sorts of improvements they asked for, they did suggest that I should turn it the other way around, that the live lecture should be the content and the recorded lecture should be the follow-up stuff. I vehemently disagree with that, and I think that's more a case of needing to persuade the students of the educational benefit of having it the other way around rather than changing it. You might want to consider, or I personally think it's a bad idea, actually including the lecturer or the head of the lecturer. I don't think that adds any educational benefit. The voice, I think, is enough, and you can get enough emotion and enough detail in the voice. You don't have to see me squinting at a camera to get that sort of added benefit. But also giving some sort of support material to that online lecture as well sort of helped additionally. But the important thing was to not add extra load in terms of extra information by doing this process. But when I asked them improvements, a fair chunk of them gave those sorts of responses. A lot of them said nothing. There's no way of improving it. That was fab. And some said, you know, please get everyone to do it. We really like that. So I did think it was probably beneficial to their learning experience, but it does need a bit of sort of planning as to what you're going to put into the basic lecture and what extra things you're going to talk about in the live lecture, so that you're not doubling their workload, you're just enriching the work that they've done already. But the benefits are, I think, that you can tailor those live students to whatever you want. It becomes a more interesting, more exciting process for us as lecturers as well, because it's a more on-the-spot thing rather than standing there with your notes and delivering the same sermon you've delivered for the last 10 years. So it does mean that, you know, we're more interactive, we're more engaged in the process as well, which I think will probably rub off on the students. But the most important thing for me is that it emphasises to the students that the lecture is not the learning activity. The lecture is part of a learning process, and ideally it's the middle bit of a learning process, not the beginning and not the end. It's the bit where you're supposed to do some reading beforehand, then you get my point of view, and then you get information afterwards. And it's emphasising to students that lectures are not the sum total of what they need to do at university. So I think it's useful for us in situations like this to rethink why we're doing lectures and what the purpose of those lectures are. And technology can help us improve those and improve it by embedding the students in the learning process and making them active participants rather than just consumers of information, I guess. But the important thing, I think, with all of these things is that the technology should be supporting the teaching and not replacing it. So whatever we do in terms of recording lectures or capturing lectures, that only needs to be part of a larger package. Not just because it would make us redundant, but because I think we're cheapening the process and selling the students short if that's all they do. As you say, they pay £9,000, they get a link to YouTube, end of story. That's not good enough. So, okay, thank you very much.